Good? Okay. Good morning and welcome everyone who's joining us in person. Hello to those of you who are joining us online. We are super excited to welcome you all to the first event of NAIOP for 2022 and the first event that we've all had for a while in person. I'm Emily Hanna. I'm a past president of NAIOP, a managing partner at Crown Realty Partners, and I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm super excited to be in that role that is literally the collision of my past life as an economist and my current life in commercial real estate. I will be joined by this trio of thought leaders sitting here to my left: Benjamin Tal, Deputy Chief Economist at CIBC, John Love, founder and CEO of Kingset Capital, and Michael Emery, President and CEO of Allied Properties REIT. Today, I'll try to guide the conversation among these gentlemen as we talk about their perspectives on the Canadian economy, what they see for the different asset classes, and what's in store for our industry. Hopefully, at the end of the discussion, we'll leave you feeling informed, filled with insights about your future prospects and your future career prospects. We'll leave about 10 minutes at the end of this session for an audience question period. I would really encourage all of you here and also those online to participate. During the panel, you can post your questions. In the chat online, you'll find a link. Here at your tables, you'll find a QR code. That is not the cocktail menu. It's the place where you can download and access the platform to pose your questions. At the end of our session, we'll see and look for the most exciting questions and pose those. So now, let's get started. Although the reopening plan took a few steps back at the end of last year, as Omicron did its thing, throughout the year, our industry held up extraordinarily well, better than most could have predicted at the start of a pandemic. Most of the asset classes showed an amazing resilience in terms of rent collections, lease renewal rates, and ultimately valuations. The year ended with the REIT index showing a 35% total return, the MSCI Real Pack Index an 8% total return, vastly different from last year where they were both in pretty negative territory. Investment activity was at an all-time high, with a number of foreign investors entering the market and no apparent COVID discount. Groups like Blackstone and Oak Street acquired across Canada, and a Spanish family office made a small addition to their portfolio through the acquisition of the RBC Centre, a great nod to the future prospects for office in downtown as well. So, lots of optimism here in this room in commercial real estate as we enter 2022. Ben, I'm hoping you can spend a few minutes giving us a little bit of your outlook for 2022 when it comes to the overall Canadian economy, with a bit of a focus on those indicators that we tend to fixate on in commercial real estate.
Yes, the outlook for 2022, I have no clue. Try to get a straightforward answer from an economist, try a virologist. No, really, like they don't know. The only thing I know is that the next Greek letter is pi. By the end of it, all of us will be fluent in Greek. Listen, everything is up to the virus, but we can make some educated guesses about our ability to coexist with the virus. A year and a half ago, we were under the impression that you get your vaccine and everything will be over and that's it. It's not. So we know that we have to live with this virus, and it will be an endemic as opposed to a pandemic, as we all know. Which means that a year from now, we'll still be talking about it, but it will not dominate our life. Because we will have much more ammunition. That's my working assumption. So my working assumption is that 2022 will be a transition year from a pandemic to an endemic, with major implications, because we will be doing this more and more and more, and it will be back to semi-normal, and COVID will be in the background. That's a reasonable working assumption. It doesn't mean that the economy will go in straight line. In the beginning, we tried to define the shape of the recovery, and we said it will be a zigzag economy. It will be dancing to the tune of the virus, and that will be the case. And quite frankly, when it comes to 2022, economically speaking, it's relatively predictable. The winter is bad now. It's going to be negative GDP, more or less. The spring will be better. The summer will be on fire. I can tell you that. And then the fourth quarter, the beginning of next year, will be so-so because we will have the pie or whatever it is. And we'll have to try to figure it out. And that's when economic activity will slow down. It's predictable, the way 2021 was. And in the middle, you get 4.5% GDP growth, and the REITs market is doing wonderfully. So it's really a lot of volatility, but it's predictable. So that's the way I see it. Now, what's less predictable, and we'll talk about it later, is the side effects of this 4% GDP growth. That's inflation. Now, if you are under the age of 30, you don't know how to spell the word inflation, but of course, this will be the number one factor that will impact your business over the next 12 months. Nobody knows where inflation will be 6-8 months from now. Nobody. And when I say nobody, I include the Fed and the Bank of Canada in that nobody. We are all pretending. I sit here, but nobody knows. What I can tell you is that if inflation does not start going down in the second half of the year, I don't care about it for the next few months, it will be up. That's given. But if by June, July, August, you don't see it going down, look for interest rates to rise much faster than expected now. Planting the seeds for a 2024 recession. So I don't think that that will be the case because the Bank of Canada and the Fed get it. Every economic recession was helped, if not caused, by a monetary policy error in which central bankers started to raise interest rates too quickly and were overshooting. You see, central bankers, they are human. They make mistakes. And if you see inflation still at 4% in July, August, September, not going down, they will continue raising interest rates because that's what you do. And you overshoot by definition. And that's my number one risk scenario. I don't think it will happen, but we have to think about it. So from your perspective, when you plan, start paying attention not to tomorrow's inflation numbers, but in the second half of the year. And at the end of the day, this is not about inflation. Everybody's talking about inflation, but this is not about inflation. It's about what it will take to bring inflation back to normal. The Fed, the Bank of Canada, over the past 40 years, spend all their time building this inflation-fighting credibility. They're not going to toss it away, just like that. They are going to fight inflation. The question is what it will take in terms of higher interest rates. And if inflation behaves as expected, then we are fine. If not, that's a risky scenario. So we can discuss it later, but that's the story. So overall, 2022 will be a strong year, but non-linear.
Thank you, Ben. John, as Ben confirmed, there's a lot of uncertainty around economic predictions, but as an asset allocator across all of the asset classes, curious to get your perspective on where you see the highest absolute returns across asset classes going into this year and the highest risk-adjusted returns, which is something you often focus on.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here. It's great to see everybody here. And I think, our core working assumption is if you just watched this room over the last 30 minutes, you saw all the energy and how happy people were, see other people network and so on and so forth. So, the issue of return to work, return to urban cores, all those sorts of things, from my perspective, gets answered whenever I'm in a room like this. So, the working assumption is that people will be back to the office in bigger numbers and in stronger force than some pundits say. I think, we have to have an outlook. We can't say we don't know anything. And, Ben's being facetious because he actually knows a lot. But, I think our working assumption is that inflation is going to be elevated for longer, that the interest rate response will be relatively muted because of excess debt levels will amplify any response. And I think the central banks have spent the last 10 years trying to actually stoke some inflation, and they're going to be reluctant to repeat the mistakes of Volcker in the early 80s. And so that would be our working assumption. So if you look at that scenario, it's actually ideal for real estate. Because if you've got elevated inflation and a modest interest rate response, it's a great working environment. And to Ben's point, we just hope that no one makes a bad policy mistake. That said, as we look at allocating capital, I think you can allocate capital to whatever asset class where you have skills to execute. Because, again, it's the ability to execute strategy that differentiates returns. And I think there's opportunity in every asset class. And, we're looking at this world, and it's so different than prior cycles, because in prior cycles you had inside the asset classes supply-demand imbalances, which created, shocks that took a long time to absorb. This is just a health crisis. And we don't see the same kind of supply-demand imbalances. There are some, but at the margin, it's not significant. So, our strategy, we invest in every asset class in every major city, and so, we're going to continue to do that. And I'm pretty optimistic that we will, that inflation for sure is going to push COVID off the headlines sooner versus later, because. You've seen the last few days, Alberta and Saskatchewan releasing or removing all the COVID restrictions. Most of Europe, for sure the U.S. Ontario is in another world, right? But that too will end, and I think we will all move on. So I've got a pretty optimistic outlook. There's a ton of pent-up demand. There's a ton of capital in people's hands. I'm sorry, I'll not go on, but if you take in February of 2020, Canadians' balance sheets had Canadians in aggregate had $40 billion of cash in the bank. Today that number is 340. And so there's enormous, deferred spending, there's enormous capacity to spend, and I think there's an enormous desire to spend. And I think, to Ben's point, we're going to see an amazing second half of the year.
So all of the asset classes are of interest, and in this environment of interest rates probably moderating, moving up, but not to a point where we can't afford to do what we're doing because of the moderation that central banks have all shown. Michael, office is not a contrarian investment thesis for you. It's deeply embedded in the DNA of Allied REIT. I'm hoping we can shift. We talked a little bit about people getting back into the office, but can you share with us some of what you're seeing, the tenants who are leasing, renewing, and what are the factors that they're looking for as they sign new deals with you? And are those vastly different from what they were looking for 5 years ago?
Great question. Great to be here. Welcome, everybody. I'm very glad John didn't exclude office from the asset categories KingSett is prepared to consider. The equity capital markets have completely excluded office at the moment as a sector that they're prepared to consider. But the interesting reality there is that the equity capital markets are gearing off what people say. And what we're experiencing in the real market is what people do. And what people do is very different from what they're saying and what they're saying they're going to do. So for example, we have 1,300 tenants across the country. Right now, 87% of those tenants, representing 90% of the area in our portfolio across the country, have reopened their offices. They haven't brought all of their people back at this point in time, and we actually have no way of knowing what percentage of people they've brought back at this point in time. But the reality is they have reopened their offices, and we need to discharge our responsibilities to them across the country in that context. The other thing that's fascinating, not one tenant of the 1,300 has to date approached us and said, we need to contract the amount of space we lease from you because we're going to be pursuing a hybrid model. Not one. And trust me, it's not because they're being polite. A lot of tenants have come to us and said, we need more space, principally in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. And we've been able to accommodate them. And they've been making long-term commitments to more space. So if we judge by the behavior of the people we serve across the country, what people are saying is completely misleading in relation to what our people are doing, our users, the people we're responsible to. The other thing I can say, Emily, is our leasing activity in 2021 in particular was remarkably strong. Net effective rental rates at the Well exceeded our expectations, and we're now 90% leased at the Well, and I think around 95% pre-leased in the development component of our portfolio in Toronto. And these are long-term commitments, in some instances by existing users in the marketplace, and in many instances by users that are coming into the marketplace for the first time.
Well, I mean, it just confirms what we all know sitting here, where we've all seen the stats of, in comparison to all of the costs that a typical company faces, office occupancy costs are such a small portion, especially when compared to the cost of attracting and retaining talent. So if you keep that office open just for the 4 people that you're going to have in there that one day, it's sort of a negligible cost at the end of the day. I'm going to shift a little bit, since you, Ben, just like Michael, are a strong proponent of the strength of city cores and the strength of people being attracted back to the city core. You've also talked a lot about the supply-demand imbalance in housing and the need for purpose-built rentals. I believe you've advised the City of Toronto on their inclusionary zoning policies, and I'd love to get a perspective from you on how you think cities can ensure that the economic incentives to developers aren't eroded when policies like those are put in place.
Yes, so before that, let me just say something about the elephant in the room. That's inflation, what we discuss, and interest rates, because really, at the end of the day, that's what counts. So we really have to discuss it. So I'll spend 2 minutes on that if it's okay. I think that if you really want to say something about inflation, to what extent it will be elevated, our working assumption is that the Bank of Canada and the Fed will not allow inflation to go beyond 2%, let's say after 2024. They simply will not allow it. So it's a question of how responsive the economy will be, and the real estate in particular, to higher interest rates. And I say it will be very responsive because I think that the economy is much more sensitive to higher interest rates. But why inflation is high? 60-70% of it is the supply chain story that you hear. And I say, first of all, and that's extremely important to understand, this supply chain business, it's all about COVID. And it's all about demand, most of it. Think of it. If you look at durable goods, sales, it's now, in 1 year, we accomplished 4 years of consumption, in 1 year. Because you press a button and you get your exercise bike. It's like, listen to this, it's like parachuting 75 million people into the US overnight. And the minute they land, they start spending. That's what we are talking about. This is a demand shock. Even a normally functioning supply function will have serious issues to deal with it. And this is not a normally functioning supply system. Remove COVID from this, and you have nothing. So the working assumption, that's crucial from your perspective. The working assumption is that the supply chain situation will improve dramatically by the end of the year. It will get worse over the next few months, and then it will ease. That's the working assumption. If you don't get it, then you have inflation, and then you have higher interest rates going. So that's crucial, but I think it's reasonable to assume that that will happen. And therefore, our working assumption is that interest rates will be rising, but slowly. And your enemy is not higher interest rates. Your enemy is rapidly rising interest rates. And that's why I'm terrified of a monetary policy error. And when I meet with the Bank of Canada, and I meet with them very often, unfortunately, I tell them, take your time, baby steps, don't rush. You will get it, because the economy, as you mentioned, is extremely responsive to higher interest rates given the debt level. More so in Canada than the US, and that's another reason, if you care about the US, why I don't understand why people believe that the terminal rate in Canada will be much higher than in the US. A year ago, people expected the Bank of Canada to move much faster than the Fed. The market realized that it was wrong. The market is also wrong about assuming that Canada will be raising interest rates higher than the Fed, because our sensitivity to higher interest rates is basically double what you see in the US. There is no need. Their inflation rate is rising, and we can talk about maybe immigration later, why our wages are not rising. To your question, because you asked something else, I think. But
Housing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Supply, demand.
Listen, for the first time ever, governments at all levels understand that this is supply. This is about supply. For generation, we have been talking and fighting supply issues using demand tools. And that's not working. So for the first time, we're talking seriously about supply. We have the task force in Ontario that is now released. I was part of it. And I can tell you that we are talking about density. We're talking about different ways of looking at the situation. I totally believe that the only way to inject some affordability into the system is a rental solution. And you cannot have a rental solution without purpose built. We have to do whatever we can to encourage them to build more. Give them some incentives, a lot of incentives. That's the only way to inject affordability into the system. And I think that they're starting to get it, but it's not even close to what it should be.
When you say give them incentives, the developers?
The developers.
So
taxes, development charges, whatever.
So John has a large purpose-built rental portfolio and invests on behalf of institutional investors. There's an insatiable appetite on the part of institutional developers, for sure, to build purpose-built housing that's good quality, that has long-term cash flow, stable cash flow. It perfectly aligns with what our institutional investors want. So there's really, I guess, John, from your perspective, not really a capital hindrance. Where is the hindrance, especially in the context of some of the work that you've done with rezoning, maybe?
Well, I mean, the Ontario Task Force report that Ben referenced that came out yesterday, I put up on LinkedIn this morning, is a must-read. Because it's 55 recommendations. It's not a long, you can get through it. But it is right on message. And it's talking about all the constraints to housing, which is a broad range. It ranges from entitlement delays, but it's also things like intensification of existing housing, changing the definition of a single-family home, allowing, garden apartments or basement apartments or, those sorts of things. And there's a number of tools that are available to different levels of government to immediately increase supply, as well as the longer-term solutions, which are all development-based. But it's clear it's a really well-written report. The recommendations are really a must-read for anyone who's interested in this issue. We've moved aggressively to build our multi-residential exposure, because if you just look at the demand drivers, the immigration is, we welcomed more new Canadians last year than the US welcomed Americans, not per capita, just gross numbers. And these numbers are going to continue. And they have nowhere to live. We're not building enough housing for these people. So, it is a favorite investment topic for us, and we look to continue to build our residential portfolio, because it's clear that demand's going to continue to outstrip supply no matter what happens, and obviously that makes all your fundamentals northbound. But read that report. I agree with Ben that supply is becoming, more known. It is super frustrating. We've talked about, all of us in the industry have talked about, the lack of supply for some time. And, Canada has undersupplied demand for a generation. And so we have the lowest housing units per capita in the G20.
You really read the report, actually.
Yeah, that's right.
And tweeted it this morning.
I put it up this morning. But but also, and that's the Bank of Nova Scotia stuff, right? Which is another bank. But it also, Toronto has the lowest number of housing units per capita in Canada, and has lower today than we did 5 years ago, because this continues to go on. So housing is a favorite investment class for us, and action's needed. We're doing an affordable fund. We're doing, obviously, purpose-built rental. We did the Northview privatization. We're doing lots of things.
Rezoning from commercial uses to residential to fill the need. So I wanted to shift now to another, I guess, social imperative, and that's the topic of decarbonization. Because our industry is such a huge emitter of greenhouse gases, and climate change is considered really a material risk in any of our investments. So for those of you who aren't aware, Canada, like many of the developed countries, have committed to achieving net zero by 2050. Carbon taxes will rise by 300% between now and 2030 in order to create the incentives required to reduce emissions in line with the targets that have been set. Institutional investors, many of your firms, have made bold pledges to achieve targets sooner, and a number of the major cities across Canada have also implemented GHG emission reporting requirements and reduction requirements. So I know, Michael, with your new assets, they can be designed and built to easily achieve zero emissions. But for the older assets, notwithstanding that there's a value in keeping what's existing and the value of the embodied carbon there, how can you address the need to achieve significant carbon reductions across older assets?
Yeah, well, it is topical, especially for us, given what we do and have done for several decades now. Here's the interesting thing I'm learning, and I want to emphasize learning. I don't sit here and before you and hold myself out as an expert. But where we have concentrated to date in terms of the E in ESG in real estate is on operations. And there is a great deal we can do to improve the impact of operating buildings on the environment. And many of us have done it. Our users, our tenants, are essentially insisting that we do it. Our investors, interestingly, are also insisting that we at least accord respect to this social goal and make strides towards achieving it. So when you're building something new, LEED is really all about operations at the end of the day, or at least it has initially been all about operations. We're now migrating in our understanding to the development of new structures and striving to find ways actually to develop to net zero, which is not an easy thing to do, but it is not beyond the realm of possibility. One of the things we're finding is our buildings, which were created effectively through recycling, taking a building built over a century ago for a different use, adaptively reusing it today, that has a measurable benefit in relation to demolishing the building and building a new one. And we're beginning to recognize and quantify that, and people who evaluate us in terms of our environmental practices are beginning to give us credit for that. Our users have given us credit for it for some time. So I don't feel that we are hobbled in meeting legitimate ESG objectives because we got a bunch of old buildings that were built long before the building technology we can take advantage of today.
And in fact, you have, as a public equity player, you have access to green bonds, which you folks have issued, and that's to sort of, I'm assuming that's to fund the upgrades that are required in any of the...
Well, it's really interesting. The green bond framework, which does need to be audited periodically as well as at the outset, does recognize that if we allocate significant amounts of capital to the restoration of existing structures and the improvement of their operating parameters, we will be allowed to use those funds or designate those funds as green bond eligible. And we've done that. We can still go back today. I think you're allowed to go back 3 years. We can go back for $400 million today of green bonds. So what that really means is the next $400 million of green bonds we raise will be to cover expenditures we've already incurred that are eligible by everybody's recognition as green.
Mm-hmm. So public entities can issue green bonds that finance these necessary upgrades. And John, you've achieved zero certification at one of your buildings thanks to some of the existing building systems that were there and with upgrades. For core holdings like Scotia Tower, it's, the investment horizons are certainly there to do some of the upgrades. Does that leave us in the private sector, amongst the private equity players, at a disadvantage, given that we don't have access to public?
Yeah, no, I think of it differently. I don't think it's regulations. I don't think it's incentives. The fact is, our customers, our lens is our Toronto. Scotia Plaza is the first building in Canada that was of any size that's carbon zero. Our entire 5 million square feet core Toronto portfolio will be carbon zero by 27. Because the 2050 stuff is of less relevance to me, as you might expect. I think that we think that we'll have a distinct competitive advantage because we're out in front, we're spending the money, we're doing the technology, we will be zero carbon. And the customer will recognize that. The office tenant will know that they're not onboarding any carbon by leasing in our building versus what they experience elsewhere. I think the renter in an apartment building, carbon's the new smoking. Will recognize the value of renting in a building that's zero carbon. We're working on the hotel side. We're working right through the platform, and because I think it's just sound long-term business. And our investors, endorse it and are quite enthusiastic about it. But that's not the driver. The driver is, we're going to face a consumer of every asset class who is going to put increasing importance upon where they're occupying being zero carbon.
Well, you talk about attracting and retaining tenants, and this is a world of extremely socially engaged employees,
right.
And where the space people go to is part of their brand.
Right, and
so.
It's resonating well in the system. We're hardcore on this, and we will be zero carbon in the whole portfolio in Toronto in 5 years.
Oh, that's a bold statement. That's exciting to hear. Okay. I'm sure we'll read it in the ESG report and follow up and track it.
It's all there.
Okay. So Ben, the move to decarbonization and the shift from fossil fuels doesn't really bode well for Calgary, an already suffering market. If you were the ruler of Calgary, what changes would you make to ensure some prospects? I know it ties in with your decarbonization inflation theme too.
Yes, so as usual, let me answer a different question.
Take it however you want. Go for it.
And then we'll take it to these questions. I want to go back to demand and immigration because I think that's core to what you do. And we talk about not enough supply, all this business, we know that. But I suggest whatever shortage we have, it's worse than than we think, even the official numbers. I'll give you a few examples. You are a student in Montreal, in university there. Your parents are in Toronto. Stats Canada comes and asks you, after the school year is over, are you going back to your parents' house? Yes. If you say yes, the minute you say yes, you don't exist. You are not a household because you belong there. We are undercounting hundreds of thousands of unit demands because of this, the student thing. This is huge. So whatever we are underbuilding, we are underbuilding worse. Right. That's one thing. The other is new immigrants. Very quickly, you said, you're absolutely right. We got 400,000. Last year, the US 500. The last time I checked, they are still 10 times larger than we are. So relatively speaking, we are much more. Now, 70% of those new immigrants to Canada that arrived during COVID arrived from Canada. They were in Canada. They were non-permanent residents. They were students. For them, it was just a change of status, not a change of address. And I know, because I'm involved with that the trend now and the inclination by the government is to increase the share of new immigrants that arrive from Canada. They are more educated, they are younger, their propensity to buy a house is higher. It's going to change the real estate in a very significant way.
And how do we get them all to Calgary then?
We'll talk to Calgary in a second.
Just trying to keep you on track.
I know, but this is interesting.
I have an answer for your question, by the way, if you want.
Yes, but I do really. So we'll talk about Calgary now. Listen, I think Alberta will lead GDP growth in Canada for the next 2 years. But they're starting from a very, very low base. So of course, it's easy to do that. I think that the only way to save Alberta over time is innovation. And I think that's something that we need to see in the real estate market in general. If you look at innovation and the growth in innovation, measures in different ways, real estate in Canada is the last. We're still building the way we built a long time ago, and we have to change it. And it's starting. And we see it more and more in Alberta, and that's the future. We see startups in real estate, and we are actually, CIBC is involved in that. Our labs is one of the examples. That's where we are going. Without that, Alberta will stay behind. And I don't think that will be the case. We see it already, and Alberta will be a leader in green, I believe, but it will take a while.
That's interesting. John, did you have a perspective?
Well, I mean, you know, if we as a country could really wanted to take on climate change, if we really wanted to decarbonize the globe, not you know, Manitoba, we could say we should accelerate our exploration, production, and transmission of our relatively clean energy and disintermediate coal globally. So that's LNG, it's oil, it's uranium nuclear, it's wind, it's water. It's, you know, we have, across the country, we have so much capacity to generate energy that is so much cleaner than is typically out there. So just imagine, I mean, if I was, you know, if you could make these changes, which of course you can't, you know, I would double the production in the oil sands. I would increase all the gas production. I'd have transmission everywhere, because our goal should be to disintermediate coal everywhere. And you're seeing, you know, Germany decommissions their nuclear while they're burning coal. You see all the new coal in China, India, elsewhere. We could use our resources, our ingenuity, and our capital to replace those very dirty sources of energy with far cleaner energy. And every province has a stake in this game, and we as a country could actually have an impact globally.
Infrastructure fund for KingSett.
Yeah, well, you know, there's a little political nuance in the middle, but if you know, if you could get beyond that, if there was actually bold leadership, pull this country together to say, you know what, climate change is important, and we are unique in the world with the ability to produce so much excess energy from so many different sources. And we've got capital, we've got human capital, financial capital. We could disintermediate coal globally. That's a big idea.
That is indeed. Okay, guys, I was just going to do a time check. I think at this point, I am going to turn it over to the audience, because we'd be excited to hear a little bit of some of the questions that you folks have. So back to the zero carbon and ESG theme. One of the questions here is, how does zero carbon and ESG advance in residential construction? I'm assuming when the end user doesn't care nearly as much as the commercial tenant. What's the driver?
I think the premise is
Hands
wrong.
up.
I think the customer will care. And I think the customer will increasingly care. And you know, if you're building, I mean, in our view of a multi-residential building, you get to zero carbon, you know, that's going to be a very important element of a renter's decision. I mean, there's two elements. How do you build a zero carbon building? The actual building part, which is quite complicated, that Michael spoke to. But on the ongoing operations, which you also spoke to, you know, it's basically electrification. And because that's how you get zero carbon in Ontario. And I think that zero carbon will be increasingly important to a customer who says, I've got a choice of 2 apartment buildings. One is zero carbon, one isn't. What are my values? It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, Emily, just to echo John's comment, one of the things I noticed at Allied back in 2018 when we committed to submit ourselves to formal ESG scrutiny was there was huge resistance across the organization because it meant more work. They had to gather huge amounts of data across the country, and every member of the team needed to contribute to this. And the resistance initially was enormous. But the minute we explained at a more abstract level what we were doing this for, not only did people accept the additional work, They were actually inspired by it. So I think that strongly suggests that people will ultimately favor carbon neutral over carbon laden, even in rental apartment units. We're lucky in office. Our users demanded it long ago, and if we didn't respond, we would have been rendered uncompetitive. But when I looked across our organization at the extent to which people were ultimately inspired by the initiative, and the extra work became not a problem at all.
And once you take those extra steps, I mean, to Ben's point too, the technologies that are available to us to make those steps easier, it's not a matter of tracking on Excel spreadsheets anymore. There's a lot of systems that you can put in place to facilitate. So this is a little bit of a shift in direction. This has more to do with people and their career paths. What kind of leadership advice would you give to the next generation of real estate leaders in the industry? I'm sure it's a question you get a lot. John, shall we start with you?
So, leadership is a great topic because leadership and leadership skills is something that everyone can work on throughout their career. And leadership is a few things. In this world, it's showing up, it's dressing like you mean it, it's doing more than what's expected, and it's asking those around you, what can I do to help? That's leadership. And you'll find if you build some of those toolkits in your career set that you'll get noticed. Leadership is consulting but deciding, having a vision, being true to your values. It's in this industry, which, once you're in the real estate industry, it's the low end of the gene pool, right? You never get out. It is building those relationships around values, respect, transparency, integrity. That's fundamental to building your leadership skills. But if everyone can think about, if I can do something for someone else today, that person will succeed.
Michael?
I can't add a lot to that, but I always think of leadership today as practicing humanism. And I think our industry has transformed from one that was almost inhuman in its conception, focused on spreadsheets, buildings, structures, materials, to one that's profoundly human. So to my mind, leadership is actually inspiring, elevating other human beings who are part of your team. And communication is necessary for that. Behavior is necessary for that. Actually seeing other people. It shocks me, actually, how many people don't see the people around them other than the ones whom they wrongly, in some cases, consider to be important and significant. And it's amazing how deeply people want to be seen, recognized, appreciated, acknowledged. So leadership to me is very human, very personal, and something that I think has a great deal to do with making a large, disparate group of people coherent, culturally aligned, and basically inspired by something, whether it's the vision, the business, the approach to the business. So it's a big deal. And I see leadership at Allied at every level of the organization. I also see the appalling absence of leadership. Not quite at every level of the organization anymore, thank goodness. At the top, we're just awesome. No, but I mean, really, it took us 20 years to get the senior leadership team properly composed, properly constituted, and covering all of the right bases. It literally took 20 years, and we're never going to be there.
It's an ongoing
But hopefully we'll get closer with the passage of time. Anyway.
Ben, I'm sure you're shocked to hear the real estate industry talking about all of these sort of soft skills and other things that you wouldn't typically hear us talking about. But I wanted to use that as a segue to ask you, you've made a lot of comments on hospital capacity, and as COVID becomes endemic, you've warned that hospital capacity is a major risk to the Canadian economy. Do you see a role for public-private partnerships and maybe a role for our industry to take a leadership position there?
Absolutely, because if you look at what's happening, it's amazing. When it comes to spare capacity per acute beds in Canada, we are the lowest in the OECD. The lowest in the OECD, with the exception of Mexico. Now, we know that at this point, government policy regarding COVID is not about the number of cases. Everybody knows somebody with COVID now. It's not a big deal. It's about hospitalization rate. And we reach capacity much faster because we operate in normal times at 97% capacity, other countries at 85%. So the minute you have COVID or a wave, we reach capacity like that. And then you have to restrict the economy. Look what we are still experiencing with major economic cost. That's the reason why, since the beginning of this madness, the US economy outperformed the Canadian economy in a very significant way because they are more open. Because they can, because they haven't reached capacity as quickly. Same goes for Germany, France, and other European countries. So if this is not a wake-up call to inject more money to the system, I don't know what it is. And it's not just about building, although it is, but it's also about people. It's about nurses. You talk about immigration. We need nurses like there is no tomorrow. You look at the new immigrants that we got, 0 nurses. You look at the construction workers, by the way. We need them desperately. The number one reason why we don't have supply is trades. We don't get them from immigration, so we have to fine-tune, but that's a different story. I always move to the other things, I don't know why.
We're getting used to it.
And, but absolutely, I agree that we need to inject money, and money is coming. We will pay for it. Taxes will rise for that. But that's a different story. I'm talking about a situation in which we have to, this has been a wake-up call, I hope. You will see more money. Definitely, the government cannot do it alone. So you will see PPP for sure in this kind of environment.
Well, if we could, I'd love to kidnap the three of you for the rest of the day, but our time has come to an end this morning, and we all need to get back to our day jobs and our offices, keep those office buildings full. Thank you very much to the three of you, and thanks to all of you who have joined us in person and online. I hope we've left you feeling somewhat informed about the prospects for our industry and the economy and our careers going forward, filled with some new insights and ideas to take with you. I'll turn it over to Ali, who has, there you go, who's NAIOP's president.
So thanks everyone for attending. It's really great to see so many happy faces. The first event in a long time. We actually had about 160 people in person today and 260 who are live streaming. It's a pleasure hearing from such a distinguished and vocal group. Emily, thanks for asking these very important questions to all of us in the room. Ben, thank you. You really know how to speak very entertainingly about a very serious topic. John Love, business leader, also the biggest LinkedIn poster in the room. And Michael Embry, I think, is the president and CEO of the largest covered land play portfolio in Canada. So thank you all.
Covered land play?
So I'm Ali Damji. I'm your 2022 NAIOP president, Greater Toronto Chapter. A little bit about me. I'm a managing partner of real estate at Forum Equity Partners. I've been a long time NAIOP volunteer member, and it's really great that we're all in person here, and we're really striving to make sure that this year we're back to some level of normalcy. I want to firstly, thank all of you for the support, the members and the volunteers for the past couple of years, because it's been a real challenge attending events virtually, but our membership stayed strong throughout this period. And in particular, I want to give a shout out to some key volunteers. A warm message of gratitude to our outgoing 2021 President, Nurit Altman, who's here. I know how much Nurit was pushing for as much engaging and in-person events as possible throughout the year, and we had a lot of stops and starts. It was great to see such an enthusiastic group at our last evening event back in November, where Nurit moderated a very distinguished panel. I also want to thank our outgoing board of directors. Joseph Shaw, our 2020 president, who also had to deal with the mess of COVID. He's a longtime NAIOP volunteer. Rebecca Askew, our departing GR committee chair and current NAIOP corporate rep. I'm sure many of you have seen the GR updates that we received over the past couple of years, in particular to the sponsors, and that was really driven by Rebecca. Our outgoing membership chair, Nick McCrae. Charlene Schaefer, our outgoing marketing chair. Emily Long, our departing Developing Leaders co-chair, who is staying on as a volunteer as well. We appreciate your service. The 2022 board includes Nurit as past president and 2023 incoming president, Christina Iacucci. In addition, the board also includes David Tweedy, Leona Savoy, Ryan Nelson, Chetan Baweja, Charlie Deeks, Duncan Smith, John Stewart, Kevin Hardy, Tom Pinkham, Noah Gordon, Amy McLandris, Andrea Wolf, and Jared Menkes. The board, together with all NAIOP Toronto volunteers and our association management firm Redstone, are focused on a hopeful return to in-person programming, networking, and education opportunities. So this will include bringing back some of our old favorites, including volleyball, golf, and the ski day. The ski day is actually coming up this Friday, February 11th, and hopefully some of you can join. And if you haven't registered, please do so. There's still some spots available. We're also holding an evening event on March 8th to commemorate the International Women's Day, and it's going to be pretty exciting. We've got a newly renovated office space in the downtown core where the event will be hosted, along with some really exciting panel members. Our 20th annual Rex Awards will be taking place on April 7th. Expect a big celebration. More information will be coming, but for now, team submissions are open until February 10th. We also have an exciting year of education programming, which includes our regular CREST courses, including the popular Argus workshop being held on March 10th. Notably, and in addition to our CREST programs, our education committee has also developed a leadership series, which includes the Schulich School of Business Emerging Leaders Program on April 20th. This is a members-only the programming series, and this is where it was talked about leadership early on and how to elevate your skills in the face of organizational behavioral changes and shift in strategy in the changing face of the environment right now. This postponed NAIOP golf tournament from 2021 is rescheduled for Thursday, May 19th. Save the date in your calendars and more information will be circulated. A really exciting initiative, if you're a student member or a member with a university student, we have launched a student scholarship, which is open for applications until Feb 18th. You can visit the student scholarship page on our website to learn more. Bubbles have begun again. It's also not too late to register to participate. You can register on the website. We're really hopeful this initiative continues. This was an initiative we put together during COVID to keep connections strong. And what we think it'll deliver is, a tighter group of networking opportunities in a focused environment of investments, development, and other topics. Lastly, thank you to our 2021 sponsors and those returning in 2022. We thank you for your continued support, and we'll be working hard to engage with you this year. And that concludes our event. Thank you all so much for joining, and hope to see you on the slopes on Friday.